everyone, and welcome to today's conversation. I'm going to be joined by Shannon Banks, and we're going to be talking about leadership in a virtual environment, something that both Shannon and I have experience of, both as practitioners, people who actually work virtually and lead teams virtually, but also as teachers of that. We've spent a lot of time helping organizations all over the world to grow and develop their leaders and to operate more effectively in a virtual environment. My name is Brough. I'm CEO of Artha Leadership, and we are a consulting firm that helps organizations with business transformation projects and in developing their leaders using the action learning methodology. Most recently, I spent 15 years as the vice president in the executive development group of Caliper, running action learning programs all over the world for companies like NASDAQ and Johnson & Johnson and many other companies that you might not have ever heard of. But I've run over 150 action learning programs all over the world, most of which have taken place 90% in a virtual environment. Let me introduce you to Shannon, or better still, let me allow Shannon to introduce herself so that you know a little bit about her, and then we'll get started on our conversation. Shannon.
Thank you, George. It's great to be here. I'm Shannon Banks, and I'm managing director of a leadership development company called Be Leadership. I'm based just outside of London. As George said, like he has, I have a lot of experience working virtually and leading virtual teams, and I work with my clients on that as leaders. And I think it's highly relevant today. So prior to starting Be Leadership 5 years ago, I worked within Microsoft for 17 years, largely virtual for most of that time. So I bring some of that experience into this conversation.
Great. And when we talk about you and I practicing virtual leadership, just for people to understand, I'm based in the south of Brazil. You can probably tell from my accent, I'm not originally from the south of Brazil, but I've been here for the last 22 years, and my office was in Princeton, New Jersey. So I live in a place called Curitiba in the south of Brazil and work in Princeton, New Jersey. So just to give people an idea of the dimension of what we're talking about.
Yeah, ironically, George, as you can tell from my accent, I'm not from here either. I'm from the US, have lived here 17 years. And when I was at Microsoft, my managers were outside the UK the whole time I was in the UK. And now my team and clients are all over the world. So another example.
Absolutely. And so let's talk a bit about that. So in your experience, Shannon, when you're leading a team in a virtual environment, there's a different dynamic that there is when everyone's in the same physical space. What's the best way, in your opinion, for a leader to connect with the team in that virtual environment?
Yeah, it's a great question, and something I both work on and have thought quite a lot about. I think an important element for me is that there's a real distinction between connectivity, which we have lots of, and connection. And I like to make that distinction because, I mean, there's no question that connectivity is something that can add value and that we are highly dependent on. So like, I saw some research prior to COVID that an average adult spends a day out of every week on their phone. And that's increased in the younger generation. So it's just like insane how much connectivity we have. But that level of connectivity doesn't necessarily lead to connection. So I've done some research during the COVID pandemic around this, and it appears that a third of us are struggling from loneliness during lockdown. So we have plenty of connectivity, but it doesn't mean we have connection. So I don't know, I think when you look at connection for leaders and how leaders can help to develop connected relationships with the people that they work with and care about, I think a lot of it is around building real relationships, increasing kind of psychological safety and trust, and spending time having human connections.
It's interesting, isn't it? So many organizations have seemed to have fallen into the trap recently of thinking, if you give everybody a Zoom account, access to a laptop, and a PDF from HR with best practices from working from home, then all of a sudden everything's fine and it will work perfectly. And that's just not the experience that we have with these teams, is it?
No, not at all. I mean, I think I recently actually did some training around team psychological safety. And, it talks about stuff around appreciation and mutual support and kind of allowing people to make mistakes and that kind of thing. Those are the things that really create connection between people. That and actually giving people time and space to be themselves. Interestingly, I know I've heard a lot of people surprised at how much authenticity the virtual world can bring to relationships. Like, I ran a training and everybody, one of the takeaways from this training was, wow, I thought in the virtual world, I wouldn't feel like I had built an authentic connection, but I have. And part of that is I'm sitting here in my real life environment, and dogs are coming in and kids are wandering in and stuff. And actually there's benefit to that because you get to know each other on a more human level.
Really? I completely agree with that. I mean, I'm passionate about the benefits of having a virtual team. And I think that gets to the heart of what you just said, gets to the heart of it, which is people are human beings first, and we have different roles that we play in life. And many, when you go back 15, 20, 30 years, there was, and in certain cultures, it's still the case where you leave your personal life at the door when you get into the office and that type of thing, which is nonsense, because we want people to bring their whole selves. Now, bringing their whole selves means they bring all their baggage and all their productivity and all their creativity and all their innovation. And what that requires from the leader is, guess what? Leadership. That's the role of the leader, is to understand this person as a person and to be able to figure out, how do I help this person contribute the most that they can contribute? Mm. So there's an extra layer of complexity for the leadership, but hey, that's why you get the big bucks as a leader, is to be able to figure out, how do I put this person and these people as a team in a position to be successful?
Yeah. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. So how do you think leaders can do that effectively?
I think it's a mindset change. And to me, it's the difference between management and leadership. Okay. Too many people are managers, right? And the face-to-face environment lends itself to management, that kind of command and control. And I need to be there for the people. I need to tell them what to do. I need to be able to answer their questions. I need to know what they're doing all the time. All of that to me is management, it's command, it's control, and it's not conducive at all, as we know, to innovation, creativity, good results, discretionary effort, all the things that make the difference between you and the competition. Leadership is about taking a step back and saying, okay, we're going to create a vision, and whether I create it or whether the team creates it, there are different ways you can do that. We're going to get everyone to buy into the vision, and then I am going to help create the environment that allows people to deliver on this vision, right? That's a mindset thing. And so many people fail because management is difficult and not very effective in a face-to-face environment. It's horribly ineffective in a virtual environment because the manager goes nuts trying to figure out, I've heard horrible stories of like people spending 80% of their time doing timesheets and stuff like that because the manager just wants to know, what are you doing all the time? It's like, but what's interesting to me is I think the virtual environment forces you to do your job properly to be successful. And by that, I mean, all of the cracks that you have in a face-to-face environment are magnified. So if the team has problems communicating, it's magnified by 1,000. If there are conflict between personalities, it's magnified. If people are not clear on what we're trying to achieve, it's magnified. If they're not clear on what's my role in what we're trying to achieve, it's magnified. So to me, I think the manager's job has to be laser focused on those things. Mm. Why are we here? What are we trying to achieve? What's everybody's role in it? And then what does everybody have that they can contribute? And then you let go and let them go do it.
Yes. So I'm finding what you're saying really interesting because within Be Leadership, we have a framework of skills that we think are needed in the modern workplace. And 6 of them relate to connection, which we talked about. And 6 of them relate to what we call context leadership, which
Right.
is really about kind of stepping up out of the weeds and not being a content expert or not always being a subject matter expert, but providing the context that people need to be successful. And I've always thought that was relevant. So this wasn't something that we developed in the past few months. But I think looking at the environment today and the increase in virtual work, you can really see the difference between leaders that do that well and leaders that don't, and see the importance of that. So I 100% agree with you.
And I think it's important to maybe touch on a point here, which is, when we're talking about connectivity and connection and the role of the leader, we're not talking about hugging trees and singing Kumbaya, right? We're not talking about, oh, this would be a really nice things to have because we're all HR. You and I are not HR people, right? We don't come out of an HR background. We help organizations be successful. We develop leaders. That's what we do. So let's be really clear here. What we're talking about is the difference between your team being successful and productive and generating the results and being innovative, and your team being dysfunctional, right? This isn't a nice to have. This is a must
No.
have in the virtual environment. Talk a little bit about your experience of the the results that this drives in teams.
Yeah, I mean, I at Be Leadership, we're focused on 2 things. We're focused on social leadership, which we see as 2 things, and one's around social impact and one's around business impact. And I want to see leaders who are able to do both of those successfully. We talk about bringing an organization's social purpose to life through their people. But that's not, like you say, that's not a soft thing. That's about creating better business results, better business impact, stronger performance. So yeah, completely 100% agree.
The other thing I know that you're really focused on is, people might not know the acronym VUCA, but VUCA is, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. It's the
Yeah.
world we live in, and guess what? It's VUCA on steroids in the last 6 months, and of course, working in a virtual environment adds to the complexity. It's an extra layer of complexity. Talk a little bit about what skills differentiate a successful leader in that virtual environment.
Well, I think we started talking about that already. So I think that um, in a VUCA world, so those context leadership skills that I mentioned and the connection skills become really, really important. It's not to say they're the only skills you need, but I think if you don't have them, you will really struggle. And just as an example on the context leadership side, I think that, well, I read some statistic that said that 65% of kids in school today are going to join jobs that actually don't exist today. So if that's true for our children, that's true for us as adults too. And the pace of change that's happening is just crazy. And so that shifts the skills that we need, because frankly, we can learn all the like subject matter expertise that we want, but if that's going to change in 3 years, then that's not really the most valuable place for us to spend our time. So I think it's really important that we learn how to learn and that we are able to be flexible in the way that we apply ourselves. Yeah. There's a lot of research I bet you've looked at too around generalism and generalists versus specialists. And there's this idea of T skills, where it's important to have some important depth, but also have breadth, and bringing that together in a broader skill set. I think that is absolutely essential now.
Yeah, I agree.
What
And
do you
it's
think?
in.
Tell me about your views on this, George. I'm really curious to hear.
So I agree with you completely. I think the other thing that's really interesting is people talk a lot superficially about knowing your team and I say superficially because most of the time it is superficial. Oh yeah, I know my guys, I've worked with them forever. And you and I have both had this experience where we sit down in a meeting and we're facilitating a conversation, and within 5 minutes, everybody's told everybody else things that they had no idea, right? And are uncovering depths and abilities and experiences and skills that could be drawn upon. I mean, it's nonsense. As human beings, we don't even know ourselves, right? Much less somebody else, right? So I think it's a myth when people say that they know their people. I think it's also an invitation, because that's where the found money is, right? So to me, one of the real important things is to get to know your people, and what that means is allow them to explain who they are, what they're interested in, what they bring to the table, and then allow that to be impacted by everyone else's view of them, which really is what a 360 is. I mean, a genuine 360, multi-rater assessment is, here's my view of myself and what I think I bring to the table and what I'm interested in, but I'm going to add to that everybody else's view. I mean, at the moment, most teams tend to be the leader's view of the person, and that's the only thing that counts. I think Shannon's great at this, I think Shannon's terrible at that, and it will be like that forevermore, and I will divide up the work forevermore based on that. That's just nonsense. I think, my view of Shannon is absolutely valid, but so is Shannon's view of Shannon, and so is John's view of Shannon, and Mary's view of Shannon, and everyone else's view of Shannon, and let's put it all together and try and figure out everything that Shannon can bring to the table, so that we can then use that. Because once you've got all the pieces, you can fit them together in different ways to make different pictures.
So I have some follow-up questions to that. So first of all, are you seeing more organizations look at people in that way? What are the trends that you're seeing around it?
They are. I think it's one of those things that they don't know what they don't know, right? So people don't know that that's important. And once you show them, once you sit down and facilitate that conversation, so if you've got a profile, right, if you've got one of those personality assessments, a good, robust, scientifically based one, you take that information and you show them, here's how you can use it, and you facilitate the conversation. I mean, one of the things I do is when we're doing diversity conversations is we sit people down and we ask them in the team to apply 2 labels to themselves, right? Any 2 labels that they choose, the 2 most important labels to them. And it's fascinating, because I mean, I've done this with a group of Japanese leaders, right? Where they were all sitting around the table and they all said, we don't have diversity. We're all male Japanese. They were, unfortunately, it was a male group of male Japanese. They were all the same. I said, no, you're not. Let's just do this exercise. And the labels that people attached to themselves showed just how different they were. I'm a father, I'm a lawyer, I'm a Manchester United fan, whatever it happened to be. There were all these different labels that this is how I see myself. And all of a sudden, you're looking at it through different lenses. So I think when good leaders, of course, are smart, right? They figure out what works. And when you get them into that conversation, they realize we've just hit gold here, right? We've just hit gold, and they go for it. I think the challenge is they don't know that information oftentimes exists in the organization, and they don't know to have that conversation. And I'm sure you've faced this, that we sit down and start working with a project team, and all they want to do is, let's get it done as quickly as possible. And you say to them, no, we're going to spend time getting to know each other. It's, oh no, that's a waste of time. We don't have time for that. It's like, seriously, you don't have time not to do it.
Yeah.
So we spend a little bit of time in a very structured way of helping them to get to know each other, right? And then they realize the value, and everything else comes quicker. So I think, in a roundabout way, I think we have to show leaders that they're sitting on this gold mine, and then they'll run with it. That's been my experience. What have you found?
I think similar. So I think getting self-awareness is one of the biggest foundations, the best foundations to increasing leadership performance.
Yeah.
And I think it's essential. And as you were talking, I have to ask what your 2 labels would be for yourself.
Wow. My two labels, at the moment, I think my two labels would be I'm a Scottish Brazilian and I develop leaders.
Nice. I like them.
The beautiful, I say deliberately at the moment because they change and I have every right to change them going forward. But I think those are the, the two things that are most important to who I am, how I see the world, what's important to me, what I care about, what I bring to the table. I think those would be mine. What would your two be?
I was worried you'd ask that because I have to really decide it. I think the two that came to mind first are mother and entrepreneur. But I agree with you. I think those would potentially change moment to moment, hour to hour, day to day, depending on the context they were asked. And I think it's hugely insightful, actually. It's interesting what immediately springs to mind. So I didn't edit that. I just gave you the
Yeah.
two that immediately came to mind for me.
And if you do it with a team, and as the teams are working together and you allow them to refine it, I mean, that's fine. It brings them together in a way that's incredible because this is how I see myself. These are the labels I apply, not the labels I apply to you, but the labels I apply to myself, right?
Well,
And there's a strength in that.
it allows for further conversation as well. Like
Yeah.
the labels that people select are really telling, and whether or not they're the whole picture, they won't be, but just whatever little sliver you get of the person through those allow for a bigger conversation. And that's what you really want. To going back to your very first question around connection, I think it's about helping people see people as they really are.
Yeah.
And you have to find ways to really facilitate that as a leader, I think. I
Yeah.
have
And I think,
another related question for you because it's very related to this and I have to ask. So I know you're also really interested in personality and you brought it into what you just talked about. And I'm curious about personality in the context of working virtually, since that's our scope for this.
sure.
How do you think different personalities are impacted by working virtually, or how do you think personality plays out in the virtual context?
I think it's fascinating because obviously, as we know, personality has a big influence on behavior, right? Personality and behavior are not the same thing, right? Your personality is fixed, it's neutral, it's just your preferences. Your behavior will change according to stimulus, but your personality is always a big influence on your behavior.
Mm.
And I think what's interesting in the virtual environment, two things. One is your personality traits can obviously help you and it can obviously get in the way. And as a leader, it's important for you to know the personality traits of your people so you can figure out how do you help them use that. I'll give you a really practical example. Let's say you're someone who's very creative and very, very good at coming up with ideas, but not particularly organized or particularly good at structure. When you work in a physical office, right, and you might have your manager sitting next to you and you have your meetings scheduled and everything, it helps you keep on track. You then suddenly transition into a world where, as you said, you're sitting in your spare room and you're organizing your day. It can be easy for you to get lost, right? So you have to help someone with that particular situation, whereas someone else who maybe might be the opposite, someone else who might really like people and really like the interaction with people, might be very happy in the face-to-face environment, but less happy in the home office environment. But I think what's interesting is, again, going back to the labels, when you have the manager falling into the trap of saying, here are my A players, right? Shannon, John, and Mary, they're my A players, right? And then Shannon, John, and Mary transition from working in a physical space to working in a virtual space. And all of a sudden, Shannon, John, and Mary, maybe their productivity goes down.
Yep.
Maybe it doesn't. But then you've also got, Sandra and Natasha and Billy, who might have been seen as C players in the office environment because guess what? They didn't like being interrupted. They didn't like being structured and told what to do. All of a sudden they flourish in the home office environment because they're able to organize their day and get things done. So I think personality is really, really important, and you need to know the personality. And just a reminder for people who maybe don't have this kind of background, you cannot see someone's personality. It's physically impossible. So you might have observed them for a year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. You have not seen their personality. You've seen their behavior. If you want to measure their personality, you get a scientifically validated instrument that does that. Okay. Put that together with your observed behavior, and you have a full picture of how you can help this person. But I think it's important to know what drives them. What are their motivators? What's everybody's individual buttons? And how do you help them be successful? How do you set up the formula so that whether they're working in the office, whether they're working at home, whether they're doing some sort of hybrid of this, how do you help them be successful? Which, again, let's go back to our earlier conversation. That's your job as a leader. Your job as a leader is to help the team be as productive as they can be. So you need to figure out, how do you help them do that? And how do you do that with the teams that you...
So one thing that's definitely come to mind for me as you were speaking is the SCARF model. You may be familiar with that. I studied with the Neuro Leadership Institute, and David Rock there basically created a model that they've learned that the brain and the body respond to physical threat and social threat in the same way. And so they've classified the social threats that exist, and SCARF is the acronym for the various classifications of social threat. So S is for status. So if you feel either belittled, or you're presenting or working with someone you feel is superior to you, you may feel a status threat. C is certainty. So if you feel like you're in a situation that's ambiguous and you really want more certainty, you're going to feel a status threat. A is autonomy. So if you feel like you don't have enough freedom and flexibility to do what you really need to do or want to do, or you're being told how to do things, you may feel an autonomy threat. R is relatedness. So that very closely relates to the connection that we were talking about and belonging. And finally, F is fairness. And fairness can be, I want to be treated the same as everyone else, but it also can mean I wanted to be treated appropriately based on my situation. And so as you were talking about personality, I can see connections I often see connections between those threats and different personalities. And that model has helped me and some of the leaders that I work with really think outside my own views about what could be threatening for someone else. And interestingly, with this model, the same things that offer threat or create threat also can create reward. And you can see connections between personality and which of these are most important for you as a person. So I, for example, know that I'm quite extroverted, and in Myers-Briggs terms, I'm a J. So I actually like quite a lot of structure. And when I look at the SCARF model, the two things that are most triggering for me are relatedness and certainty. If I have them, I feel satisfied. If I don't have them, I feel more threatened. So I think being aware as a leader that people are coming at things from different perspectives, and like you said, the way they're behaving doesn't necessarily indicate how they're feeling and what their values are and what their preferences really are. And it's worth finding ways to have conversations around that. So like this model is one that I know some of the leaders that I work with have used with people they work with to facilitate a conversation around what they care about and what they need in order to not feel threatened in the workplace.
That's wonderful. That's a really nice model. And it's interesting because I think people instinctively know this, but sometimes it's useful to spell it out. When people know what the objective is, okay, what they're trying to achieve, and they buy into that, and they know what they bring to the table to help achieve that objective, they're almost unstoppable. I mean, literally. I mean, I've worked with big organizations at senior levels, you know, NASDAQ and Johnson and Johnson, where these project teams have brought in results that have left the C-suite's jaw on the floor. I mean, they've said, I don't believe that these people were capable of doing. I mean, we knew they were great, but we had no idea they were that great. And they said, how do you manage to do it? I said, well, number one, we didn't do it. They did it, but here's how they did it, right? All we did was help line up that flow, right? They had an objective. They bought into the objective. They bought into the objective. It was important to them. They knew what they brought to the table. They knew what everybody else brought to the table. And then they just went off and did it. I mean, it's simple. And people confuse simple with easy. I mean, of course it's not easy, but it's not complicated. You know, as a leader and in a virtual environment, in any environment, but particularly in a virtual environment, that's all you really need to do. Is line things up like that and then let people go make it happen.
Yeah. I think that the other thing I'd add to that is the stuff around team psychological safety. So we know that if there's safety in the group, then people can make mistakes. They have the ability to, they can then learn from those and then they can increase their performance, right? So I think that in addition to everything you said, which I 100% agree with, I would say if you can create that trust and psychological safety within the team as well, then you've got them firing on all cylinders, and it's like really amazing what people can achieve.
So tell me a bit more about that, because psychological safety is really interesting, and I know that many business people have that kind of allergic reaction. Is, oh, psychological safety, it sounds like safe spaces, and it sounds all fluffy, and we don't need this, and people can't make mistakes. I don't pay people to make mistakes, and all that nonsense that comes along with it. Talk a bit about how do you help leaders understand what it is and why it's important?
Well, I think I agree with you. I mean, certain cultures are more likely to be resistant to it as a concept than others, and I don't know if I would always start with that. Maybe I would work on that under the surface with some leaders, actually. But to be fully transparent, I think that it's not at all soft or fluffy in any way. So it's based on Amy Edmondson's research, the way I think about team psychological safety. I also did a certification with an organization called Team as One. And Amy Edmondson talks about team psychological safety as a team that is safe for interpersonal risk taking, right? So I think if you just look at it in really practical terms, a lot of the tech industry, which is not really that soft, it's quite like not touchy-feely, it's quite technical, has a real strong belief in trying to create better interpersonal risk-taking because they can see the business benefit. Because really what we're saying is you need to be able to fail really quickly to be competitive in today's market, because it's only through failure, iteration, are you able to innovate. And only through innovation can you stay ahead of your competitors. So there's like a really, really strong business reason for it. And you know, you mentioned VUCA and the VUCA world. You know, the more we're in this kind of VUCA environment, the more important it is to be able to rapidly fail and innovate. Otherwise, you're not going to be successful.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because the work that I do with teams, when we talk about a safe environment, it's a safe environment to challenge your assumptions. It's a safe environment to challenge other people's assumptions. It's a safe environment to ask really good questions and to have the time to think about what the answer to those questions are. And it's helping people move away from this nonsense that there's one right answer. You know, there are very, very few questions in this world where there is one right answer. There are 1,000 possible answers that we can look at, and we need to figure out what's the best one that brings everybody along to the best result. And I think that destigmatizes it a little bit, I think, for me, that once you get people out of the environment, especially, finance people and engineers and lawyers and God, poor people, but people who are used to having the right answer, or doctors, people who pride themselves on having the right answer. And then they get into this VUCA environment where there is no right environment, right answer. I mean, if you're doing a change project, right, if you're trying to work out how do we increase the retention rate of our people because we're having 15% turnover of people in their second year in the business and it's costing us $4 billion. There is no one right answer to that, right? And you have to get people comfortable with the fact that it's okay that there's not one right answer, and that you need to challenge your assumptions. You need to be able to challenge other people's assumptions in a way that they want to hear you, and then put all that information together to come up with the best possible solution.
Yeah. So that makes me think about the importance of inclusion and diversity as well, because finding all of those varied possible solutions comes more easily if you're able to tap into a diverse set of resources.
Yeah.
And I think that for me, what that brought to mind was the importance of that in this VUCA environment as well. It also made me think about your comments early on about your work in action learning. You know that I also do a lot of work using action learning, and action learning is something we're familiar with, but maybe not everybody who's listening to this is. Do you want to talk about how you feel action learning relates to this stuff that we're talking about here, like the pace of change and creating a trusting environment? How have you seen action learning work in the work that you've done with it?
So action learning, for those who don't know, is the gold standard methodology for helping teams to work together effectively and to help people grow and develop whilst at the same time they're delivering. Okay, so action learning is literally what it says on the box. You do the action and you learn at the same time, and the learning comes from the action. And you have an action learning coach whose job is there to focus on the process and to help the team and the individuals in the team learn as they're doing. So it's a real project. It's not an MBA business case. It's not it's not a case study. It's a real project that the team is working on as they would normally. You just happen to have somebody who's there, who's skilled at helping the team figure out what's working, why is it working, what could we do differently. And at the heart of action learning is questions. Really, really good questions, asking good questions and building on the answers. So it's a series of action and reflection cycles that helps people do and extract the learning from what they're doing at the same time. So just so that people have a context for what action learning is. I think in terms of what we've been talking about, there's a couple of things that are interesting with action learning is because it's based on questions, you're naturally challenging your assumptions and helping to challenge other people's assumptions in a way that they want to listen. Mm-hmm. Because, questions are less offensive than declarations. Mm-hmm. If I say you're an idiot, then you're probably going to be offended by that. If I say, how else could we look at this problem? There's more chance that you're going to be open to looking at alternatives. And also within action learning, everybody in the action learning team is equal in terms of hierarchy. There is no hierarchy. So, again, going back to experts, it's not that you have the one expert and, Billy's the only person who's allowed to pontificate on the financial situation because Billy's the CFO and everyone else has to keep quiet. That's not how action learning works. Everybody asks questions and everyone brings everything that they have to the table, and then you get the best result. So I think, action learning naturally helps to create that environment that we've been talking about, where you know each other and you know what you're trying to achieve and you know what you bring to the table. The other thing that, in action learning is you're very, very clear about what's the problem we're trying to solve. And that's the first thing you do. If you don't define the problem, you can't solve the problem. So I think, action learning as a methodology really helps with that because you're producing. you're not learning and then hoping somehow that people can translate that learning into a real life situation. You're actually inverting it. You're taking a real life situation and you're helping people learn from it in a structured way, in a way that's been proven to work effectively and work quickly. So I think action learning works with that. Um, and as I said, over the last 15 years, I've done 150 or so action learning programs. 90% of them are virtual because those are the people that we're helping to develop. They're people who have global and virtual teams, and so they have to learn how to operate in that environment. And I think my experience is that they find that it is possible. And I think that's another barrier that people face, is the psychological barrier that somehow we can't do this in a virtual environment. It's just too difficult. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, they say, well, we need to meet face to face. And then you ask them, it's like, well, what's the worst part of your job? What's the part that drives you absolutely nuts? And everybody says the meetings. I said, why? It was because our meetings are unproductive, they're terrible. It's like, well, hold on a second. You've just said that you can't do this project virtually because you need to be face to face. But now you're telling me that your face to face meetings are a disaster. Mm-hmm. It's not being face to face or being virtual that makes the difference. It's, can you run an effective meeting? That makes the difference. And can you connect with people? And can you communicate with people? Can you help them connect with each other? Can you hold each other accountable? Can you have the difficult conversations? Can you do all of that? That's what makes the difference. And whether that's face-to-face or virtual is a technology issue. But the differentiators, what's going to make you successful as a team, are those abilities and those skills. And I'm interested in your opinion. We're talking a little bit about leadership in a virtual environment, and we've talked about some of the upsides and some of the potentials. What are the biggest pitfalls? What are the biggest obstacles that you see that leaders face?
Well, I mean, if we go back to connectivity versus connection, the connectivity that the virtual environment brings and relies on brings lots of good stuff, right? It brings ability to share information from a distance. It brings access to a larger talent pool that you might not have had otherwise. It brings my clients and my associates who are all over the world that otherwise they're not here in Chertsey, so I wouldn't be able to work with them if I didn't have a virtual life. So lots and lots of positives, actually. And I think people get those because I think, well, maybe not before this particular pandemic, but I think now a lot of people realize that that is all possible through that. But like anything, I think there are potential negatives that you have to really kind of watch for as a leader. I mentioned the fact that a third of people in a recent study said they were lonely working virtually. So I think that's one. I think the blurring of lines between work and life has positives. So like I said earlier, it might allow us to be more authentic with each other, surprisingly, but it also means I have a lot of clients. So in this period, I've either had clients that have had their work completely go dry, or quite a large number of corporate clients that have had the opposite, and they're working completely nonstop from crazy early hours in the morning to crazy late hours at night, because it requires a lot of self-control and self-discipline to not allow those lines to blur too much. And
that's
so,
interesting. On just on that, because I again, in terms of a role that a leader can play, is helping the people in the team understand those boundaries. I mean, there are people who will try to be 100% available to the team, will try to be 100% available to their kids, 100% available to maybe their husband or wife or parents that they're looking after, and will just burn out. Because they're used to, well, when I'm at work, I give 100%. When I come home, I give 100%. But when you're working from home, they try and give 100% to all these people, and there is only 100%. So as a really practical tip for leaders, help your people set the boundaries. Mm-hmm. Help them say no to you, right? Yeah. Help them to be able to help the kids understand that, you know, I might be here at home, but that doesn't mean that I'm available as I used to be at the weekends. You know, is that, you know, when the kids see you at home, they think you're available. Now you're working from home. So I think a leader can do that in a very practical sense. It just helps set the boundaries.
Yeah, another practical one I would put out there that may be self-evident is role model behavior that you want to see. So I know too many leaders who decide they want to work on Sunday, and so they send loads of emails on Sunday. Well, just by nature of sending those emails on Sunday, they're kind of implying to people that they need to respond. And so having at least a conversation around that to say, you know, my personal choice is to work on Sunday, but I'm not expecting a response from you. Or doing things like you can set your email not to send until Monday morning instead of sending on Sunday. But being thoughtful about what you're doing and how that's influencing other people in the system, I think is the other practical tip I would give.
Yeah, and I think I would add to that by saying, spend all of your time focusing on what you expect your people to deliver rather than how they're going to go about doing it.
Yeah.
Right? You know, here's the result I need from you. Here's what I need in terms of quality, quantity, timeliness, whatever. Here's the resources you have. Help them understand themselves, help them understand their personality and what's going to help them, what's going to get in the way, and then be hands off. If they want to do it between 11 at night and 1 in the morning, that's their choice, right? As long as they deliver it by the time that you actually need it. Don't get in, and it goes back to this thing of trust. You know, trust is a fun thing for me in teams, because everyone, of course I trust everyone, of course I trust everyone, and then you see them in practice, you know, and as I said, they want people to spend 90% of their time filling out timesheets because they don't trust them. You know, I once worked with a quick story. I once worked with a team of very senior leaders, I mean, vice presidents, right? A group of 20 people that got together for the first time to start working on this project. It was going to be a 1-year project. And we kind of introduced some of the action learning tools, but we let them go. We let them kind of go and kind of struggle through it and see what worked for themselves and what didn't work. And they said, yeah, our ground rules include the fact that we all trust each other. Wonderful. They got to the afternoon of the first day of working together. And we said to them, you decide when you want to take a break. You decide if you want to keep working, whatever. They got to about 2:30, 3 o'clock. And somebody said, I think we're, you know, the energy level's going down. I think we need to have a break. And half of them, or 2 or 3 of them said, yeah, that's great. And the rest were kind of, yeah, maybe. And then someone said, no, we have to keep going. Well, let's just get this one thing done. So they kind of pulled the whole team back together. And then another 5 minutes, and someone said, actually, we really, really do need to take a break. And, you know, like maybe half of them said, yeah, let's take a break. But again, a couple of them said, no, we have to pull through. It took this team of vice presidents 1 hour and 10 minutes to decide to take a 15-minute break. And it was beautiful. It was the best learning you could ever have, because we, you know, afterwards we just debriefed it and said, okay, you don't trust each other, because there are a million ways you could have done this with trust. And it's the same thing that you can tell with your virtual team. If you're all the time spending your time thinking, what are you doing? When are you going to do it? How are you doing this? You don't trust your team. And that's on you as a leader. That's on you, because your team are capable. And if your team are not capable, again, that's on you as a leader, right? So you need to figure out, how do you trust the team? And that the red flag is always, if you're worried about what they're doing when you don't know what they're doing, then you need to work on your trust issue.
I think to some degree the virtual environment pushes that in a positive way, because it creates distance and it kind of forces leaders who are reticent to lead in that way to try it, and they see positive results from it. And then they actually shift their behavior somewhat. So I think this kind of forced push into more of virtual working may have had some benefit for people who didn't realize or appreciate that they might have been controlling the how a little bit too much.
Right. Maybe let's finish, Shannon, with your your best piece of advice, a leader who's just transitioning into working in this virtual environment. They're kind of apprehensive about it, they're kind of worried about it, but they see the opportunities. What's the best piece of advice that you can give them?
Okay, best is a really tough thing to answer, but I'll tell you a piece of advice that immediately comes to mind that, again, may seem self-evident to some, but I would guess isn't practiced enough, which is spend time in every call at the beginning, checking in on how people are and trying to get to know each other and connect somehow at a human level before getting down to the business. And it will massively improve business performance and results. How about you? What would your advice be?
Yeah, I would build on that and say, get to know your people and help them to get to know themselves and each other. Mm-hmm. And then figure out how to make those pieces as successful as possible. So work hard on getting to know the things you don't know about people, but also work hard on helping them to understand themselves. Help them to understand what's working for them, what's not working for them, what they could do differently in order to contribute more. And then trust them. Most people, in my experience, and you and I have done this all over the world for many years, most people in most organizations want to do a good job, given half a chance. So trust that your people want to do a good job. If you can create that environment, your people will surprise you, and I guarantee you'll get better results than you're getting at the moment. And most of the time, you'll get better results than you ever imagined were possible.
Great. Agree.
Great. Well, thank you, Sharon. It's always a pleasure talking to you. You bring such a lot of great insight and great experience. And it's fun. It's fun talking to you. And maybe that's one thing that we should have reminded people. Work is hard, but it can be fun. Have fun, enjoy you, bring your whole self to the table and have fun and enjoy yourself and grow and learn and everything.
Totally agree. You might be able to see the bunting behind me in my office, and it's because last night my team and I had a baby shower for one of the people on my team who's just had a baby. And so we had such fun, even virtually. So yeah, I think it's not, life is too short to not have fun during work. It doesn't have to be a slog every day. I fully agree with you.
I just to finish off, I started my career working with John Cleese, the actor.
Oh, really?
In video arts. So he had a training video company, and he taught me something that I've never forgotten. He talked a lot about the difference between being serious and being solemn. He said, we're deadly serious about our work, but we don't have to be solemn. He's a serious person. He's serious about comedy because it makes a lot of money for him. He's very successful at it. So I think the difference between being serious and being solemn was something that always stuck with me.
I love that. Good learning from John Cleese.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for paying attention and listening. It's been a pleasure being with you. One thing I would ask is that we would like this to be a dialogue. Please, feel free to get in contact with us, to add your opinion, add your comments. We want to hear from you, your experiences, what's working for you, what difficulties you're having. Let us know what's going on with you, and share the wisdom of the crowd in helping you be successful in this virtual environment. So thank you very much, and good luck with it all.